When I bet, I like getting something back, even if I lose. That's why I bet with Fanatics Sportsbook. When I bet with them, I earn fan cash, win or lose, and I can flip fan cash into bonus bets or use it for new Knicks apparel at Fanatics.com. Download the Fanatics Sportsbook app and let the fan cash flow. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Connecticut residents, call 888-789-7777. Massachusetts residents, call 800-327-5050. New York residents, call 877-8-HOPE-NY. Maryland residents, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Podcast, the off-season pod, a rebranded version of the pregame pod. Regardless, it's still Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC. I am here to talk about the Knicks' new head coach, because guess what, folks? They finally hired a new head coach after a long, exhaustive process. They did their due diligence, as they said in their press releases, and I guess throughout parts of the press conference today that you might have seen on MSG. They landed on Mike Brown, the head coach of the New York Knicks, that comes here as a two-time coach of the year. A lot of playoff wins, not necessarily the final playoff win that you need. A lot of regular season wins, a very good winning percentage. Let's talk about Mike Brown a little bit with someone who might know a little bit more about Mike Brown. This episode that you're listening to is going to be our reaction to the Mike Brown press conference to an extent, but more importantly, it's going to be with someone who has more information about Mike Brown, maybe just covered a team that had Mike Brown as their head coach for the past couple of years, that was covering a team that had Mike Brown as their head coach when they won Coach of the Year. Let's welcome back returning guest, friend of the pod from Sactown Sports, Brenden Nunes. Brenden, welcome back to Knicks Film School. It's been about 2 weeks since I texted you. So if it's Mike Brown, you got any free time? And we finally landed on a head coach, and it's Mike Brown. So first off, how are you, and your reaction to Mike Brown being named the Knicks head coach?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, like you said, you called it a while ago. It seems like Mike's name was floating around the New York job for a while, including every other or maybe a third of the current head coaches in the league. I'm sure that joke is run dry by now. But yeah, I'm doing well, getting prepared for Summer League. Vegas coming up here, and we got a little similarities with. I just talked to Scott Perry today for an intro press conference for Dennis Schroeder, so a little bit of swapped roles here.
That's right. You hired our guy. We hired your guy. We will exchange questions or thoughts about Scott Perry at the end of this. I did have a Scott Perry section dedicated to this pod. Knowing the access that you have and how last time you were here, we talked about when the Knicks were about to play the Kings, why things ended the way they did in Sacramento. And it seemed less results driven. I know they were 13-19 at the time and going through a losing streak. And there was that game where I think he had just benched De'Aaron Fox down the stretch, or was just frustrated with a collapse against the Pistons that ended up looking perfectly fine with what the Pistons became that season. But there was much more off the court going on with certain players. I want to be clear, not De'Aaron Fox. So anybody that thinks that, well, okay, maybe you could clarify, not De'Aaron Fox. I know De'Aaron Fox vouched for Mike Brown toward the end of his tenure there, more so. I don't want to play for another coach that this would be like 5 and 7 years. Let's just start there. How much was his departure, if we can re-clarify, on the court results not being good enough, or player relationships not being strong enough?
Yeah, I'll really hammer down the not De'Aaron Fox specifically when it comes to Mike Brown. You could say whatever about the Sacramento situation. It's a whole different story when it comes to their organization specifically. But De'Aaron Fox loved Mike Brown, and he's come out and said as much, that when last offseason approached, Mike Brown did not have a deal currently lined up, and the Kings were ongoing a little bit of negotiations. And for some reason, we're 1 year removed from him being coach of the year. They lost 2 less games, 48 games that first year. You're the 3rd seed. You win 46 and you lose in the play-in the year after. And organization isn't sure about bringing you back. De'Aaron goes to them and says, hey, I'm not going to play for another coach. If I do, it's going to be for a different organization. That is how strongly he felt about Mike Brown, and obviously speaks to a little bit of the Kings' history if you realize how many coaches he had played for. But he didn't do that for Luke Walton in previous guys, which I know maybe Luke Walton isn't the most glowing example for a lot of people. But Dave Yeager, you could go, I guess, a little further. Definitely did that for Mike Brown. And I think there were other guys that sat in his corner a little bit as well. But there was a internal argument where Sacramento side already were unsure about Mike coming into the season and hesitating of bringing him on. And hey, are we sure we want to pay De'Aaron a max? And so it just leads to this combination of things where Doug Christie was kind of already waiting in the wings. People will know that the Kings ownership, I think, sometimes handles things a little bit differently. So there were some things with Mike that I'm sure we will get into the details, but main thing I would like to emphasize, and I'm glad we're starting with, is that there is a lot of crazy BS behind the scenes for the Kings that is hard to control. And it's why I think a lot of guys or players leave the Kings organization and get to blame it on the team a little bit sometimes, unfortunately.
So what's interesting is that used to be the reputation for the New York Knicks, especially under James Dolan. The Leon Rose tenure has largely tried to root out a lot of the behind the scenes nonsense. I know they just went through a tough season behind the scenes, which is ironic because they made the conference finals and were 6 wins away from a title, 2 wins away from the finals. And yet they still were able to manage through a lot of off the court nonsense that honestly, it's not even that much nonsense. It's just the locker room wasn't as tight as some of the other locker rooms that make it that far into the playoffs, and it seemed as if some of the cliques that emerged throughout the season were only going to be solved by lifting up a trophy at the end of the year, which is why Thibodeau ended up losing his job. And it's why you get a guy like Mike Brown that it's really where I come to with the question of how much does a tight locker room matter here under Mike Brown? Or do you think he's less of a players manager, players coach? I guess the question I really want to ask you here, Brenden, is how should I feel about Mike Brown being the head coach of the New York Knicks, who very clearly are we need to win a championship right now?
Yeah, fair. Right now, I'm going to apologize for the cat outside the door that would love to get in here. So if if you hear him,
dude, does he want to answer about Mike Brown too?
He will get in the camera. I don't know if he will make any comments.
You can go ahead, let the cat in. That's fine.
Personally, for me, when I was really enjoyed Mike Brown, and we can pick apart some of the coach specific things, but coaching obviously is also about how you relate to players. Specifically, I would say even more so in today's league. And that while Thibodeau, I think, maybe gets too harsh of a rep I think there were a handful of clips, and you would know way better than I, that I saw last year where I'm like, hey, there's some funny moments here. He's joking around a little bit. And of course, there is a sternness. And I think Mike is even more on the loose side than Tibbs, going to be very personable. And I think that relates not only to how he'll interact with fans and media and be open in that aspect, which obviously then indirectly goes to the fans, but I think that goes with players as well. I think good relationships with a lot of different guys, really, from that Popovich tree is going to tell you how it is. And I think his big philosophy was he would always point to Popovich was the hardest on Tim Duncan, and that made everybody else have to fall in line. And for the Kings, it was an interesting scenario because it was hey, who's the best player on this team? Is it De'Aaron or Domas? Well, Mike Brown kind of indirectly told you by coming in and being I'm going to be the hardest on De'Aaron because we think that everybody else will fall in line after the fact, and he's going to take us the furthest. It might be more clear cut and dry in New York, obviously. But I think that's some of the old school philosophy that still will remain. But you look at early tenure Mike Brown. I thought Zach Lowe did a really good job of breaking this down the other day. I believe that's who it was. Early tenure Mike Brown, and it's even more stern and old school Popovich way. And I think that tenure that he had with Golden State really seemed to loosen him up a little bit. You can still see success and discipline while these guys are joshing around, I guess, a little bit more often and have more loose energy to them. And I think you even see that on the offensive end of the floor, which directly came over to Sacramento, that free flowing offense where Mike's a defensive coach, I would say, first of all, but they were 25th in defense and first in offense. And that's how they broke their 16-year playoff drought. So I would say to me, it feels like one of those things where my gut reaction is expecting, I think Knicks fans will enjoy him and he's going to be really fun. But that level of expectation is just really difficult. And to be blunt, Thibodeau's probably had more postseason success than we've seen Mike Brown have up to this point. So I don't know. I think when it comes to those expectations, it's one thing. And I think, it's however much you want to value it, the general vibe around the team, which from an outsider perspective seems to be the goal of some of the change here. I think Mike will be beneficial for that purpose.
I think there's a combination of vibes is such a weird word to use for a team that, again, made the conference finals and was like a bounce away in that weird game one. Like if Halliburton's shot misses in game one, then they lose that game one. It's a spirited comeback. And let's say the rest of the series plays out the same way. We're talking 3-3 going back to Madison Square Garden for game 7. Like this wasn't, the more and more people I talk to that actually know what they're talking about, like they didn't fire him because he lost to Indiana. They fired him because of a myriad of process related things that largely go back to a lack of collaboration, open-mindedness, an overabundance of stubbornness. And I think that's where Mike Brown comes in. And I don't know how much he'll have to manage said locker room. I'm interested to see what the Knicks do with I can't believe I'm saying this, their 13th and 14th roster spot, whether they go after a PJ Tucker. PJ Brown, that's an old school name. PJ Tucker, who came here and was a de facto Udonis Haslem, Taj Gibson assistant coach as the 14th man. And I wonder if they need a guy like that just to be the veteran in the locker room that helps out. And whether PJ Brown, why do I keep thinking about PJ Brown tonight? Goodness. It's because PJ Tucker and Mike Brown are on the line at the moment. Whether
maybe PJ Dozier for some reason.
Maybe. But whether Mike Brown needs a guy like that is interesting. I think the fact that it's very clear he's willing to collaborate with his staff, with the front office, and to your point about his time in Golden State potentially creating this version of Mike Brown. Football fans here in New York will appreciate this, specifically Giants fans. But there's I know the name Tom Coughlin when he won the Super Bowl with the New York Giants in 2008. He entered that season on the hot seat and was told the season before, we'll give you one more year, but you're going to have to stop being a drill sergeant. People have to want to come to work to play football. And the 180 that has in many a book and many a documentary about that Giants team that eventually beat the Patriots has just talked about the transformation that he turned into a grandpa to the team. Michael Strahan skipped training camp that year, got fined thousands and thousands of dollars, and was like, I didn't want to go to training camp, but I heard how personable Tom Coughlin was. And he's taking them all out bowling on the last day of training camp. And you were never going to get that with Tibbs, but it seems like you got that with Mike Brown in Golden State. And it's what the Kings got when he got to Golden State. And it's hopefully what the Knicks are getting now that he gets to New York with the expectations and opportunity really of the chance to win a title. Now, one way he's going to hopefully be able to do that is on the offensive side of the ball. And I know when Tibbs was let go, a lot of people thought the Knicks were going to go look for the next offensive wonderkind. And Johnny Bryant, the assistant coach in Cleveland, was a name that got brought up. And then, he was the assistant coach with the Knicks too. A lot of wishful thinking from people who don't know that much about Johnny Bryant. But as far as I'm concerned, there is an offensive opportunity here, it seems, with Mike Brown. If I can ask you about the offense, biggest reason for them being top one a couple of years ago, was it Mike Brown? Was it the assistants? Was it just the talent overall, bringing in Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter and them having great shooting years? If you could talk to me a little bit about what made that offense so dynamic and how much Mike Brown was responsible for it, please do.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of the boring answer, but it really was a combination of a lot of different things. There's bringing in, you mentioned it, Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter that same offseason, and you drafted Keegan Murray 4th overall. And I know we're going to get into rookies, but Keegan played a whole lot and became one of the most important players on that team pretty quick. And then you see Domantas Sabonis have his first actual full season alongside De'Aaron Fox, which I think really helped optimize both of those guys. But stylistically, I think the way it all got pieced together is it really looks like the Golden State offense. If New York fans watched Brooklyn at all last year, Jordi Fernandez actually kind of really directly correlated to Mike Brown. If people know the story, Jordi was initially coaching Elijah Brown, Mike's son, at, I believe it was an AAU circuit or something like that. Mike ends up taking a liking to him, and they brings him in Cleveland, and he's kind of stuck around Mike Brown for a while, hopped around different teams, and now he gets his own job at Brooklyn. Point being, Brooklyn runs a very similar offense, looks just like the Golden State offense. It's read, flow, react. I remember Kevin Huerter saying, we don't really run plays because if we're just all going read and react, then they don't have anything to prep for. They have to be on their toes. They talking about the defense. So I think you could see a lot of that. Pace was a very big key for the Kings. I think that may have been specific to the roster that they were working with. De'Aaron Fox, they thought fastest player in the league. Domantas Sabonis, undersized of the five, but works really good in pace. I think that could have been roster specific, but I think pace in the half court, maybe not so much. That was something that Mike prioritized a lot. I think that all teams can benefit from that, and having good shooting, I think, is the way that you optimize that spacing. And I think that's what we saw Mike Brown do a lot. They were sixth in 3-point attempts the year that he won 48 games. They were really, they knocked down a lot of them, which obviously helps with the shooters that I mentioned they added. But I would say it had a lot to do with that. And the second half of that year, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe it was this year, was the season where everybody was like, oh, the officials just let it. Everybody started playing harder and more physical. And the Kings really embraced that. They were like, hey, we can't play great defense. This is going to be the vast difference that he gets to deal with in New York, because Mike was always talking about we need length and athleticism. And that may have just been because the Kings severely lacked it, but now he's got an overwhelming amount over there to work with. But I think that having that spacing and just pace really plays to the modern offense that you see Golden State run, dribble handoffs. I think Cat plays well into that, and some of the roster guys that you guys have there allows everybody to get touches within the flow.
Who, in your opinion, do you think will benefit most from that type of offense being installed on the Knicks roster?
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to say like maybe some of the more tertiary guys, I guess. Like it almost feels unfair even calling McHale that. But I would say that's a guy where you can kind of simplify the game a little bit more for him. Not that it wasn't already, but still getting a little bit of a rhythm while keeping it simple. You're taking one or two dribbles coming off this dribble handoff, or, just still more involved. The ball has energy was a big saying when the Kings ran under Mike Brown there. So I think guys like that, Josh Hart, maybe even a little, if Mike Brown loves his defenders. And I think sometimes to a little bit of a fault with guys that can only play one end of the ball. I think it can be tricky for any coach, but Mike specifically in certain scenarios. But yeah, I think that McHale is probably the one that stands out the most to me there. McHale and OG, I would say.
So you're talking about everybody but Cat and Brunson, and I'm basically curious about, because going through the Kings stats, it's not even the percentages, or I'm not even looking at impact metrics here. I'm literally just looking at field goal attempts, and they've got 6 guys with basically 10 field goal attempts a game. And that is, I think, something that a lot of people wanted to see with the Knicks offense when they got Mikal Bridges, when they got OG Anunoby, and you want to see it diversified a little bit more and everybody have an opportunity and not just be standing around while Jalen Brunson does that. Jalen Brunson's awesome. So that's not the worst offense to run. It was very effective to like a bunch of top 10 offenses over the last 3 years, but it can be very predictable to game plan against during the playoffs because you just have to cut off the head of the snake. And it's why I'm curious if you think, like, what Karl-Anthony Towns, do you think they can run a similar type of offense like they did as with Sabonis as a hub through Cat. I mean, let's start there. The Cat Sabonis comps. How do you think that plays out?
I think there's a lot of differences, but I also think that you can do similar things with a guy that prefers to pop rather than roll, or if Cat just wants to go halfway there, like there was some short roll working with Domas. He used to work off the elbow with Cat. It's not like Cat can't do these things. I just think Domas is on another level, and the DHO game becomes so good because like the passing, yes, but I think it's in combination with the screen setting and how like he's, great at angling and just the physicality that comes with it and everything. So I think there's a difference, but I still think that Cat will get his fair share. I think Cat's also a guy that benefits from this free flowing nature, making things a little bit more simple and letting him be a play finisher, I would say, and taking advantageous moments to maybe capitalize on something as a creator. So I think that you could go similar to Domas. And I think that you will, again, in the function that he will get his touches, but I think that a lot of people will, and it's helpful to run it through that 5. I'm just not sure we're going to see the elbow movement like we did with the Kings and the Warriors even, because those are two guys that can't shoot like Cat. He's probably the one aspect that I think is the biggest difference that he hasn't really had elsewhere. The Warriors didn't really have a stretch 5. Maybe if you want to go way back, I guess, to Lakers Cavs and jot your memory there, but Kings didn't really have it. So I think that that's going to be something that's a little bit of a different look for Mike and how you could approach that. But I think they'll get their touches. And on the Brunson thing, like, while maybe he's not the first person that comes to mind, I think optimizing those other guys indirectly helps Brunson.
So I know what you mean by the Warriors didn't have a stretch 5. Their death lineup with Kevin Durant basically playing the 5 is a pretty great.
That's fair.
Stretch 5, but like I knew they're doing what you mean with like they had Kevon Looney, they had Zaza.
They're thinking Draymond and Domas,
right? Like that. Like Draymond's not a shooter. Like I do get what you're saying in that sense, and it looks like the Knicks, as currently constructed, they're going to try starting Mitchell Robinson, which. I gotta be honest, I'm much more intrigued by them potentially starting like a Deuce McBride and them going 5 out. And you mentioned the pace and the space that Mike Brown emphasized in Sacramento. I think the number one frustration Knicks fans had with Tom Thibodeau last year is we saw like 87 possessions of Deuce McBride playing in place of Josh Hart with the starters. And the whole point of getting Karl-Anthony Towns is to play 5 out. And while all the good things and all of the floor raising characteristics of Tom Thibodeau are important, and you want to, remember those, especially when you're getting as far as you are in the playoffs every year. It's that ceiling that just felt like it wasn't tapped into, that I wonder if Mike Brown is going to do that. Do you think he'll want to play more 5 out with the way the roster is currently constructed?
I tend to think that the problem you just talked about that Knicks fans had with Tibbs sounds like a Mike Brown thing as well, to be honest. Kings fans will very quickly point at the Keon Ellis and Kevin Huerter situation that happened last year. And I think this is a good sort of transition from I love Mike Brown and I'm on the more optimistic side. I think there's also people on the other end. I said De'Aaron was one of the guys that loved him. There were players on the team that didn't really like Mike Brown. And that's part of the reason that he's not in Sacramento, even though there were extra curriculars, I guess you could say, like I mentioned. But I think that there were often times that it felt like he was searching, and you could really easily distinguish those moments where Kevin Huerter wasn't cutting it. And it's like, all right, who can give us something? And I think that's the moments where rookies will get an opportunity. Like Kings fans, again, will point at Keon Ellis that he didn't get run over Kevin Huerter. I heard mixed things. A handful of people telling me that that was not solely up to Mike Brown and not even just solely, that he may or may not have been able to. So take that for what you will. I personally am not going to hold the Keon thing against Mike. But there were very much moments he was searching. And I think the other side of that is Keon only got a spot in the rotation because he was a two-way guy. And Mike Brown didn't feel like anybody was cutting it. They were getting their butts whooped in Houston, and he put the whole bench in and liked what he saw from Keon. And he's one of the guys that, hey, garbage time, there's no such thing. I saw you play hard. You've been playing hard in practice. You're going to get some opportunity. And then Keon becomes a guy for them. So all that to be said, I guess, is that it definitely does feel like, I guess, the old school nature in a cliche way that still exists with Mike Brown is like, you can tell the guys he trusts. And if you're on the fringe of that, I know this is sort of on your list here. If you're on the fringe of that, you can tell. And he's probably going to be desperately searching for a guy that does fit into the end of that. And it's one of those things where I find it difficult to evaluate because these coaches see these guys a whole lot more than just the games that we're seeing, obviously. But yeah, I would say that's definitely one thing that I'm curious to see how it goes. I would say more of a leash for rookies than you'd say like Mike Malone or Steve Kerr, but also, you got to earn that trust for sure.
So the Knicks don't have a rookie that matters this year. They drafted a drafting stash that I have no idea if he's even going to make the roster this season. I would assume he does because of the second round exception that they can use on that 14th roster spot. But like the sophomores on this team, the Tyler Kolek, Ariel Laporte, and Pacome Dadier, those guys, I think they're right now currently slotted as the 10th, 11th, and 12th men on this team, which is why I think the way the roster is constructed, it's less about if you're looking for your guys, like, fine, you have a top 9. If those are your guys, that's fine. It's really just how they're deployed. And whether, like, do you think Josh Hart will start for the Knicks on opening night? Or do you think he'll go to a Mitchell Robinson starting 5 where Cat moves to the 4? Or will we finally see him play a 5-out look with Karl-Anthony Towns that just was not on the Knicks cards last season?
Josh Hart feels like a Mike Brown guy to me. But again, I think it's tough to gauge how much of this is context dependent. I think he's dealing with a very, very different roster. But throughout the season, I think you're going to see everything tried. Like one philosophy that he said that he got from Steve Kerr was sometimes the 12th, 13th guy, I'm going to throw you in for a game, just even for the sake of it's going to keep you more engaged in all the work you do throughout the rest of your season, because you never know when your next opportunity is going to come. And hey, if you play well, then sure. But so I think that point being, maybe somebody else will emerge in that spot throughout the course of the season. I think everybody will get an opportunity unless, say, it's Josh that gets the first shot, locks it down pretty quick. And I think one of the funnier things that Mike kind of did on the Kings side was if a guy is out for a night in the starting lineup, it may be, hey, Doug McDermott, you haven't played in 2 weeks, but you're actually going to start tonight because we don't want to mess with the rest of our rotation. And that was actually very, very common where it's like Jay Crowder, he might have started, I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but like a quarter of the games he played throughout the course of this year. Like it's definitely something that Mike will do. But to go to your initial question there, it seems like more of a Josh Hart guy to me, but I think that I'd imagine that everything will be tried. Mike is a very meticulous guy that was often, I think, not sleeping very much because he's just trying to come up with every possible option to the point where I think you can be maybe trying a little too much, but I personally think, hey, at least you're putting in the effort.
Well, you were the one that told me that like the reputation that Tibbs had coming into, like, around the league. I shouldn't even say coming into New York, but like around the league, he's running his guys into the ground. They practice entirely too much. And then in New York, we're like, I mean, if the front office or the medical staff gives him a restriction, he'll follow it. They also then hired the best medical staff in the sport. And then, like, the guy coaches to win every game. Like, the regular season isn't about data collection. It's about win collection. And he's going to try and win as many games as possible. It sounds like what you're telling me is Mike Brown will lean into the data collection part of the regular season. There may be games like back-to-backs that you don't need to play everybody. And we won't just shorten it to 7 guys. Like, it's not next man up with Tibbs. It was like, okay, this guy's now going to take the spot of that next man. Like Josh Hart, you're now playing 45 tonight. That we'll actually see like 8 and 9 guys in the rotation no matter what. Which actually, that is a specific question. Do you think Mike Brown likes a 9-man rotation or a 10-man rotation?
It's, if you only trust 9, it's 9,
Okay.
And if you only trust 8, it's like 8.5, to be honest. I think it's very dependent on that for sure. And yeah, there'll be a month where it's 9, and another month where it's 10, just depending on if you got a guy rolling, I would say, if that sort of makes sense there.
It does. It's why I'm going to be very curious to see how much difference there is this season, which is why I'm trying to ask you the questions that are like, will this be different? Will this not be what we saw? So I'm actually going to give you some quick hitters here, and they're very specific to like complaints people had about Tom Thibodeau. I'm also going to include some things that I actually liked about Tibbs that I'm going to hope Mike Brown does too. So let's just start here. Maybe 2 or 3 possessions of Tom Thibodeau's tenure, the Knicks threw a zone out there. Feels like you might want to try that a little bit more when you have Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson on the court for extended minutes. How much zone does Mike Brown implement into his defense?
A Mike Brown quote I remember, and I'm paraphrasing here, is everyone has a zone and most of them suck. So I don't think that you're going to see all that many unless he, decides that that it's necessary, essentially. And to your point, you got Brunson and Cat out there. Maybe you see it. You didn't see it very much with like Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter, sometimes both with Domantas Sabonis. So a bit, it's not like it never happens. It actually started to happen more towards the end of his tenure. So maybe you'll see more of it than they did in Sacramento, but I wouldn't bet on that one.
Now, the next one is about size, in that because Jalen Brunson is like 6 feet tall, and I can understand the hesitation to put another small guard next to him defensively. It leaves you a little small. I would rather put the better player out there than the bigger player out there, which is why at times we were seeing, like in the playoffs, there was a substitution that Tibbs made where he went Landry Shamet over Deuce McBride after Josh Hart fouled out. And it was like, why is like Deuce McBride's very clearly your next best player in the game, like yours that should be in the game. And he went to the bigger player. Does Mike Brown have any hesitations about playing small guards together?
I would not say so. The Kings also had a ridiculous amount of guards and a shocking lack of forwards. So it was somewhat necessary on Sacramento's roster. But no, I think that you definitely saw him roll that out there. You saw him actually, I think, get really creative with lineups, even on a team that didn't have, I would say, that much typical lineup versatility. Trey Lyles at the 5, very sparing moments where like Alex Len is playing next to Domantas Sabonis. Keegan plays anywhere from the 2 to the 4. He's very positionless. And I think as long as there are guys that handle the skills out there that they need and can match up with whoever else is out there, then he's good. It doesn't really matter the size as long as you can match up.
So I don't know if you know this, Tom Thibodeau's never been ejected from a basketball game. He will yell and scream and say Jesus Christ to literally every referee that he disagrees with.
Interesting.
He's never been ejected. He's been teed up a bunch, but never the double technical. I think is just too addicted to coaching that he doesn't want to. I'm not going to let anybody else call plays. So obviously there are some clips that I've seen go around of a very emotional and I don't know how to say it. Lost his damn mind, Mike Brown, at times on referees, and that adds to the personality. He's much more outgoing, like you said. He's much more loose. I worry in this market that could become that you might be a little more open. You might say the thing in the media that leads to the thing being the story. If someone's worried about Mike Brown potentially being the story because of a thing he chose to say, what would you say to that person?
I think that Mike is going to ride for his guys, and that's going to be the point of any time he has one of those moments. And I don't recall a moment I've seen him do it where I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? I think typically you see on-court frustration from the players. And to be blunt, the Kings had players that talk to the officials a lot. De'Aaron Fox specifically. And as I mentioned, Mike Brown was big on, hey, De'Aaron, you're our leader. And if you're trying to get that guy not to talk to the refs, then it's like, all right, I got it. I think is essentially what was going on there. But no, I mean, I think it's going to be riding for his guys. And if anything, I'd imagine it's things that Knicks fans will largely appreciate those moments. Like the first thing came to mind is take that for data back with Fizdale,
Well, That's Fizdale, which was a completely different. We're talking about playing guards together. Frank Ntilikina started his rookie season at the 3.
The specific moment. Yeah. We can take all the other context out of it. But no, I always thought that they were, maybe a little over the top. Like that could probably be picked apart. Like bringing your laptop to the press conference and pointing out this is where it went wrong. Personally, I love the transparency. You answered every question we had in the most clearest way possible. So I don't know. I think there wasn't any moments where I thought that was out of line, or, again, either riding for a player or he's pissed off that his team's not playing hard and he's trying to get him juiced up.
Now, to the question I started this conversation with, that it seemed as if part of the reason Tibbs was let go was a lack of collaboration with the front office. That he's, one of the hardest working coaches in the league, spends all these hours looking at film. You can suggest something, but I know what I'm doing, and it's going to be my way is how we're going to go and try and do this. And the front office even said they were going to go out of their way to find a more collaborative head coach. Hearing how things ended in Sacramento, where maybe the front office had a lot of say and a lot of opinions that Mike Brown ignored or didn't want to agree with. Do you potentially see that being a problem? That if the front office wants a more collaborative head coach, do you think that's Mike Brown, in your opinion?
So the collaborative, once a more collaborative, you're talking on the New York side.
Right. Like the Knicks would like someone that if they suggest, can you change the starting 5 at some point during regular season, he doesn't wait until they're down 2-0 in the conference finals to do it.
I would say that if you took the job and that was part of their requirements, then you're probably good with that, Okay. And he is coming from an organization that was largely involved, the higher ups and everything that was going on. The Kings situation was messy last year with management, with front office, to be honest. Like there's Monty McNair sort of quietly in the wings. There's Wes Wilcox. It's like the one talking with everybody, and they seem to be on different pages. Ownership are its own thing. The Keon thing, again, from what I believe to be true, is that he was told that he could not start Keon and he wanted to, and he listened to that, So like Doug Christie, the guy that was on Luke Walton's staff previously, Mike Brown didn't pick him to be on his staff, And so just a couple examples where I think Mike Brown's accustomed to doing that a little bit. And even if you don't enjoy it, you know what you're signing up for. And I think Mike will take that as part of the job.
I'll be honest, the Christie being a holdover from Luke. Why does Brown end up in every last thing I'm talking about today, Brenden? Being a holdover from Luke Walton, and then Brown being willing to bring him in to his new staff. Like, I don't know if you know this, but Jalen Brunson's dad is an assistant coach for the New York Knicks, and like I know this is a very well-known thing, but like I was all throughout last season where people were saying this is going to be Tibbs's last year, I kept saying this is not that easy a thing if you're just going to fire the staff that Jalen Brunson wanted to play for, especially when his dad is there. And he took this gigantic pay cut in his extension. And then you trade Dante DiVincenzo. Yes, it was part of a Karl-Anthony Towns trade, so you got better, but like you traded a groomsman in his wedding. Now you're trading the coach that he wanted to play for. That might also mean you fire his dad while we're at it. And look, I'm not a reporter. I'm not an insider like you, Brenden, but I hear things. That's how I usually clarify when I say things that I know, or at least I've been told. Mike Brown wasn't necessarily their first choice. He was one of their top choices, but they basically said like, hey, Rick Brunson, Darren Erman, like they're going to be coaches that we put on your staff to start. You can pick everybody else, but we want to keep this around. And Mike Brown seemed to be the guy that's like, oh yeah, sure. I bring Rick Brunson. He's not going to be my assistant head coach or the number 2, but I'm fine with like Jalen's dad, my best player's dad being here. So that collaboration, I think is fascinating to me, or at least was something I figured when they landed on Mike Brown. It's like, oh, it's someone that's okay with 2 assistant coaching spots being already filled before he came here.
Yeah, accustomed to it. You have, I mean, it's a difference, I guess, but Steve Kerr's son was on the Golden State roster over there. I believe Joe Lacob's son is part of front office over there in Golden State. And obviously what I mentioned with Sacramento, I would say, obviously you saw it end weird. And how Christie obviously in the main seat now here in Sacramento. It's all going to be a very, unique situation based on how these guys have a relationship. And again, it seems like this Christie thing was sort of cooking in the background for a little while. He almost got the job in place of Mike initially and is kind of there. So I wouldn't take much from that unique situation where, just kind of a tough roundabout of everything going on there. And sure, you got some of the formulas, but it takes a lot for it to get to that point, I would say.
Last question from the Knicks side of things, but do you think the Knicks got better or stayed the same or potentially got a worse head coach? If in your honest opinion, how much better is he suited or worse is he suited to help the Knicks get to their ultimate goal of a championship than Tom Thibodeau?
I really think that you're kind of betting on him being a little bit more willing to just tinkle with things, I guess. And obviously part of the job description, like you sort of mentioned this time around, but also betting on just improving relationships, I guess I would say a little bit in general, and sort of getting to start that process all over, and a fresh face in the room, a guy that I think will really also value just the idea of being a team, as corny as this may be. But I think that you're sort of leaning on just switching up your culture a little bit. And because I think that they are stylistically, we're kind of joking a lot with Kings people over here, that to be honest, Mike almost feels like slightly a discount Tibbs, but a different personality, a notably different personality, even if they function somewhat similar. But the discount comes from, I think, just being a little bit less proven on Mike's side. That doesn't necessarily mean you're worse. I don't think, go back to Cleveland, LA, I guess, but very early in his career, this New York roster is so much better than what he was dealing with in Sacramento. And I think he outperformed expectations pretty drastically in Sacramento and probably didn't deserve to be let go. Their best player definitely agreed with that. Other guys didn't love how much they practiced. That will definitely be a thing. They practiced literally every single day that they could. Again, maybe be a little bit different, but every day.
I got to be honest, that's another thing that I was happy about, because all I heard was that the Knicks don't practice, and that's their off days were their recovery days, so that Tibbs could play them so many game minutes. And I was like, you know what would probably do this team well, this team that got assembled 2 days before training camp, play them less minutes in practice. This team looks like a team that hasn't practiced in weeks. That's probably why they've looked so out of sorts for a couple of weeks. So you
will not get that. Detail oriented is Mike is the definition. I'm sure that Knicks fans have seen we have to be disciplined doing the same thing, possession after possession after possession. He said it literally 25 times in a row, but I actually think it was kind of genius because it really hammers the point. And it is monotonous, but that's what he is so big on, is doing the right thing every single time. It is possession game, which I know was a big Knicks thing previously with Tibbs. So I think stylistically, offensively, I'm curious to see if you get more of that Warriors free flowing and just more of a loose personality, I guess, leading the way in the charge with these guys, a new voice at the front there. So to me, it feels like a fairly lateral move, to be honest, but I also thought that the Knicks were knocking on the door right there. And so sometimes just a slight tweak can make a positive difference.
Look, man,
and I don't think he's a bad coach.
Yeah. I don't think either guy is a bad coach, to be honest. That's the thing that I said at the end of the season. If you're going to replace Tibbs, it has to be with another good coach. I can't, the unknown of a first-time head coach with the expectations that are going to exist here. It's screaming Adrian Griffin. You need to get a guy in here that will command respect of the room. And look, I thought if you're going to go from one good head coach to another good head coach, and I think that's what the Knicks did. So look, if they had just kept Tibbs, I think they still would have had a very good chance to get very far in the playoffs and win the title. They're going to have the exact same chance to do that with Mike Brown, maybe with a higher ceiling, because he'll be open to more suggestions than, or more options, like you said, to tinker with, searching to the end of the roster, use the season to data collect, and then you're much more prepared for the playoffs. So we'll see. Do you have any questions about Scott Perry, the new head honcho over at the Sacramento Kings, who used to be the head honcho for the New York Knicks?
Yeah, it's been an interesting experience, definitely a salesman, man. Like he is good with words for sure, because every press conference we leave, again, we had one today where Dennis Schroeder is getting introduced and he's like, this is the number one guy we were targeting in free agency. Kings fans may have strong feelings about that. I get it. I think it's all very context dependent. But I don't know. He's I guess talking me into it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think I asked you this over text, but it's a good opportunity to ask you a little bit more. I mean, how difficult was it to gauge from your perspective, what Scott was responsible for and what was, I guess, just the general impression that he seemed to have left in New York. And, because right now we're getting linked to RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly. And it's like, oh my God, he was with these guys.
RJ Barrett was absolutely his pick. Now, if anybody remembers that draft, RJ Barrett was the third best player or third ranked prospect. So anybody that went 3 and didn't take RJ Barrett was going to shake up the world. Like, I think the Knicks, it was either RJ was going 3 to the Knicks or the Knicks were going to trade out of 3 to somebody that wanted to take RJ Barrett at 3. And Scott Perry was very stern on no, RJ's our guy. We're going to go with him at number 3. It's a mixed bag with Scott Perry for me and his time in New York, because the first move he made was the Karl-Anthony trade, which they were able to get a second round pick.
Yes, take me back to this, please, because just to give you my perspective, I'm like, okay, are they going to consider moving one of these top guys on the Kings? And a lot of people have been pointing out, like, well, Scott reworked the Knicks entire roster in like a couple years or however long when he was there, right? This is just what's being said, right? And I'm pretty sure this is coming from the organization side for what it's worth. And first thing I go look, I'm like, all right, I know context, but he kind of traded Melo for Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, and a second round pick.
That the second round pick did become Mitchell Robinson, but yes, that he traded Melo. Now, see, here's the tough part about evaluating the Melo trade in a vacuum. If you remember at all what happened to the Knicks that season, I don't think you need to remember, because it was a very forgettable season, but that was not Scott Perry's team. That was Phil Jackson's team. Right. And the entire year, the no trade clause that he gave Carmelo Anthony, he kept using it against him. Like, I can't trade him. He's got a no trade clause. You won't allow me to make this team get better. And so Melo was like, screw you, dude. I want to be in New York. I want to win a championship here. You got Porzingis. You're saying you want to trade me, but you signed Joakim Noah and Courtney Lee and traded for Derrick Rose. Like, that's not that's not win later moves. Those are win now moves. And these are all, you're forcing the triangle on a roster that doesn't, that you're not going to coach. There are moves that Phil made in a vacuum that are fine, but drafting Porzingis, which seemed to be controversial, but he ended up being the best player probably of the top 4 back then. The mess that Scott Perry showed up to just needed, okay, we're going to trade Carmelo Anthony to a team that can win now, and we're going to pick a direction. It became a Porzingis team. I will say, right before Scott Perry took the job, the Knicks gave, at the time, a lot of money to Tim Hardaway Jr. to be their second best player. And then Porzingis gets hurt midway through the first season that Perry's in charge. And then a calendar year goes by, and Porzingis, it's like, you're sitting this year. We're going to be bad. The Knicks have the worst record in the NBA. That's the Zion Williamson class. And the thought is they're going to tank, get Zion, and then maybe Kevin Durant's a free agent. Then maybe Kyrie Irving's a free agent. And then they trade Porzingis and use that trade to offload 2 salaries, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Courtney Lee.
Was Scott's being there in Seattle for KD talked about when KD was a free agent?
Yep. Okay. That was going to be part of the connection. And look, I was hearing that KD was coming to New York too. I don't know if it's true that like because he tore his Achilles, he leaned more toward what Kyrie wanted to do. Kevin Durant's just been very vocal about how much he like couldn't stand Knicks fans and loved to taunt the Knicks. I also think that's very like KD's very anti like what's the popular thing? Okay, I'm gonna do the other thing. Like I'm gonna go to my own vibe. And
very hipster.
Well, that's why he went to Brooklyn. Like I'd rather go play for 9 fans instead of 9,000. You know, like I would rather go play in front of a half-packed arena, which is why all of the arena lighting is more platform lighting, so you can't see all the empty seats, rather than the Garden, which I don't know if you know this, is commonly referred to as the world's most famous arena. Look, Kevin Durant jokes aside, I thought the Knicks were getting him in 2019, and part of it was Scott Perry and Steve Mills clearing the books. Look, again, it's a mixed bag because he did identify or was on the staff that identified Mitch Robinson, who was like didn't play in college and was a project, and what he's become. Like in hindsight, the Porzingis trade and having any hesitations to give a guy with that injury history the contract he was going to eventually get is probably a safer bet. He did identify Julius Randle when Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving decided to go elsewhere as like a good person to bring in. They brought in like 7 other power forwards that offseason to 1-and-1s, but they largely looked at that offseason as a reset. The thing that I then go back to is like after Kevin Durant goes elsewhere, and then they fire David Fizdale, and the Knicks are 4-18. They bring in Leon Rose, and Leon then keeps Scott Perry on as the GM. And then it's tough to decipher how much he's responsible for, how much like Brock Aller is their cap guy. I don't give Scott Perry credit for a lot of the Brock Aller things that were done. Like Walt Perrin is their draft guy. I don't give Scott Perry a lot of credit for the things that were done in the draft during the Leon Rose tenure that he was here. It's why I'm actually very curious to see what happens in Sacramento, because I'll know those are Scott Perry moves, because those are done without the shadow of these like the Leon Rose era taking over during his tenure. So look, the best thing I think he did with the Knicks is draft Mitchell Robinson. That's clearly the best thing. That's also the same draft that he took Kevin Knox at 9 instead of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Michael Porter Jr., Mikal Bridges, and Miles Bridges.
Wasn't there a really bad draft night trade too? Some real complicated one. I'm forgetting the details off the top of my head.
Not Scott Perry related, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. I could be having that mixed up, but I mean, I'm curious, man. I think it sounds like he does have full control in Sacramento. It seems right now the big thing going into next year is creating an identity. It is interesting looking at how New York was built, and it just is. It's a funky way that whole roster sort of came about, and you don't want to say lucky, but like the Brunson, just how did you know how good Brunson really was is really the main thing that I'm talking about when I say the lucky aspect, which you still get credit for sure. But right now, establishing an identity, and I think they're remaining flexible. I get what the hell is Dennis Schroeder doing on this roster? Why is he your number one? It's a 2-year deal. They very desperately needed a point guard. Well, it's a 3-year deal. 3rd year is partially guaranteed. But yeah, I think they're remaining flexible. I'm curious to see what he ends up doing with these top guys, because I think the Kings are going to remain in trade conversations for a year. I think this is going to be a long, drawn out thing. And I think you're going to get something to evaluate in the somewhat near future, not necessarily talking this off season, but I think very clearly something needs to be done. And Monty McNair's fault, or at least I would say what ended up getting him fired, would be, I would say, being a little bit too patient and advantageous at times. So we'll see how much you're really able to do that before the hammer comes down. And then it gets really tough to evaluate who's responsible for who. But I'm cautiously optimistic, as everybody says that everybody in the league loves Scott Perry.
You want to give him a runway. And I think that's one thing that, look, he's worked for a tumultuous situation under the Knicks. That's for sure. I've heard some things about the Kings ownership situation and how tumultuous that can be at times. I do wonder. My look just from an outsider perspective, as far as choosing an identity, is like, do they find a suitor for DeRozan and for I thought the Valanciunas trade was the correct thing to do. I thought do they go and find a team for Zach LaVine? I know Malik Monk's name has been out there. It's probably their best asset for the money that he commands. But like, especially in this conference, this juggernaut of a conference that they're in, like it wouldn't shock me if a nuclear button is pushed. I don't know how Kings fans feel about potentially doing that. But yeah, that would be my curiosity is that direction chosen? Because again, he did choose that in New York. That's the one thing I will say, that I knew what the Knicks were in 2018-19. They were bad and they traded Porzingis, to completely wipe the slate clean. Does he have a way to wipe the slate clean with the Kings? And if he does, how does he execute that way or path to get to it?
Yeah. And to be blunt, I don't think he quite has that way, which makes it a little bit more of a complicated scenario that he's signing up for. But I think pretty clearly, when you fire your GM the night you lose in the play-in, and then you have an intro presser for the next guy, I don't know how long later, but not very. The Kings clearly identified him. It seems like everything I've heard, Vivek has a very good relationship with him, and there's a lot of trust and a lot of hype around Scott Perry right now, which obviously is typical when there's a new guy in town. But we'll see how this all plays out. But I don't think they're going to reset. I think it's going to be somewhat of a middle ground. Maybe you get younger, but you don't want to be, in the gutter. Got to remain competitive, specifically when you're on a team that's been in the playoffs once in the last 18 years, and you got to make sure you're not losing a whole generation of fans.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this as we wrap up, like, it'll be a while before I think we can actually gauge or grade the job that Scott Perry's doing. The next time we talk, Brenden, the Knicks will be playing the Sacramento Kings, and we'll at least have something to judge Mike Brown on, unless they play on opening night, which I don't think the NBA is going to schedule Knicks Kings for the opening night game this season.
New York would have to come to Sacramento for that game,
obviously,
right? Just to be clear.
Do it that way. The opening night, the Knicks are lighting the beam. Not at all do we. I got to be honest, I think we're headed for Knicks Cavs on opening night this year. And then they'll have I think Nuggets or Lakers against OKC, and OKC for ring night. And then the next night, Knicks Cavs either at the Garden or in Cleveland. I would assume at the Garden, but it's why the state of the East, like no Pacers, no Halliburton, no Tatum, I should say. There's no Knicks Celtics buzz. There's no Knicks Pacers buzz. Those are just two completely different teams now. But Knicks Cavs, on the other hand, that could be fun on opening night. So we'll see. But regardless, I look forward to the next time it's Knicks Kings. We can check in on the job that Mike Brown is at least doing and your thoughts there. Brenden, before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all your stuff.
Yeah, appreciate you, Andrew. I hope everybody likes Mike Brown. We'll see how it all plays out over there. High expectations.
I think the results will determine how much they like Mike Brown.
Always how it works. Kings fans loved him till they didn't. Like it always tends to happen. So appreciate you having me on, man. Brenden Nunes. It's at Brenden Nunes NBA on socials. Writing, covering the Kings for Sactown Sports. About to be out in Vegas. I think I'll see you out there.
Yes, sir. I am. You talked about getting ready to go. I will just say, when people are hearing this, today's my anniversary. So shout out to Mrs. Claudio. So 2 years down, forever to go, and then a lot of packing on Thursday because I leave Friday for Las Vegas. So
yeah, it happens fast.
Have you? Now you're in Sactown, so I don't know what the weather is out there, but like, have you been staring at these projected temperatures?
Dude, I haven't even looked because I just always know what it is. Like I just gave it a glance one day to make sure, okay, yeah, this is still about to be absolutely ridiculous, where you feel like you're burning. Actually, last year I stayed at the Virgin, and it's like walking distance to Thomas and Mack, and it sounds crazy, but I really did walk that distance, and it's not even in the heat, not that bad. So
I'm staying out here though. I'm staying close to Thomas and Mack too, with the thought that, to what you're saying, just walking across, like I'll bring my podcast equipment. But that's the projected temperature for people looking on YouTube.
All 109.
Yeah, all 109 and higher for those listening on the podcast feed.
It's going to be gorgeous out there at like 11 o'clock at night. You know,
that's the thing is like, oh, it's 9 a.m. ready to go in the pool and it's 101 degrees. Great.
Yeah.
A lot of inside stuff that week. Brenden, as always, it's good to talk to you in pod form. It'll be good to see you this weekend. Thank you for coming on the Knicks Film School Podcast. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of not the pregame show, but the off-season show. If ever the opportunity presents itself, I like to check in with somebody from out of town and get their perspective. And obviously what's going on with the Knicks is they hired a head coach and we had to talk to someone that has an expert opinion on the new head coach. If you dug this conversation, please head over to iTunes, or a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Remember to subscribe. I'll be checking in from Vegas, I'm sure, at some point. We will have post-game shows after the Knicks Summer League games. Stay tuned on whether or not we have one for Friday. I will say we're due to some scheduling conflicts, we might not have someone to do the post-game show on Friday, but in the meantime, all the games the following week, starting on Sunday, we will be doing our post-game show here on the Knicks Film School YouTube channel. And if you're going to Vegas for Summer League, we're doing a crossover event with Knicks Fan TV, so check that out. We'll obviously see the graphic on the screen. We'll be doing an event Saturday night. These are all the details, so please join us there. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Let's go Knicks, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.